Let's shift gears now, Carol, and talk for just a moment about goals and goal statements.
Okay, and before we get into the technical aspects of goals, because there are some very specific technical criteria in terms of writing goals, I just want to make sure that we remember annual goals are related to the needs that result from the student's disability that directly affect involvement and progress in the general education curriculum. So that's our basis, that's what we're starting from. And so some of the technical things. For those who like acronyms, some of you might like this concept of SMART IEP goals. What are SMART? Well, the S is specific, measurable, achievable, results-oriented, and time-bound. They're specific because they are based on the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. So they're based on what the student can do and in comparison to where you want the student to go. They are measurable, so they are objective. They allow you to determine how you're going to track progress at different data points. They are achievable because they are realistic to the student and they are critical to the needs of the student. They are results oriented. They're developed with the outcome in mind. The outcome might be something that's post-secondary, but the outcome might be simply being able to move into and be successful in the general curriculum, or to be able to pass the state performance assessment at a passing criteria. And they are time-bound in that there is a defined beginning point and a defined ending point. Some of you might prefer a little bit different way of looking at measurable goals. Maybe you're more familiar with this second way because this is what is often taught in on the criteria of a good, solid, measurable goal. This is what we learn in college a lot of times. First of all, the goal will include who, the student, what the student will do, which is behavior, makes it behavioral and measurable, the criterion or the level or degree to which I want the student to achieve in order to know that they have actually accomplished the goal, and then the conditions or the time frame, the context maybe within which that goal will be achieved. You can use either way, but whichever is more comfortable to you in terms of looking at whether or not your goals are good goal statements. So how do we then go about writing goal statements? We want to focus on what the student will do, not so much how the student will get there. For example, here's a statement about Janice. Janice will read and analyze a short story for literary elements of main idea, point of view, plot, setting, and characterization. In this case, that is expectations. Those expectations of main idea, point of view, plot, setting, and characterization are directly out of the expectations of the general curriculum. Notice I said that she will read it and analyze a short story. Someone might be tempted to say that Janice will use a graphic organizer to analyze a short story. That's not in and of itself so bad. It's quite possible that indeed Janice will use a graphic organizer if that's a good tool for Janice to be able to use. But my goal isn't that Janice will use a graphic organizer. So I don't want that to be the main focus of the goal statement. I want the main focus to be that Janice will read and analyze that short story. So focus on what it is you want the student to be able to do, not so much the tools they will use in order to get there. Using behavioral terminology. In this case, Janice will read and analyze a short story for literary elements, which is more specific than Janice will review short stories, which doesn't really, it's okay, but it's not nearly as explicit or measurable as read and analyze. Add a measure to the goal statement. In this case, we have Janice will read and analyze a short story for literary elements of main idea, etc., with 90% accuracy using a literature passage from the 6th grade classroom. So we've added a level of accuracy that we want to get to, a measure, as well as a criterion. It's a literature passage from the 6th grade classroom. And then finally include the conditions or the time frame. by the end of the school year, Janice will read and analyze a short story for literary elements, etc., with 90% accuracy using a literature passage from the 6th grade classroom. And this last statement contains all of the elements of an effective or well-written goal statement.
You know, Carol, I think that choosing a measure could be a little bit tricky, especially when I know that I have to think about both functional and academic needs. Do you have some good processing questions that might help?
Yes, I agree with you that I think choosing a measure is very tricky. I think sometimes it is the thing that gets us caught the most, or we find the most challenging, let's put it that way, because it's easy to say, well, let's see, 90%, or what is, to what level does a student have to be able to achieve something in order for it to stick and to be used in 5 months from now or 2 months from now? Also, what are some different ways of expressing measures? What are different measures? Because 90% might not, sometimes it might be okay, but sometimes that might not be explicit enough. So I think some of the things that we might think about are, what are the performance expectations in the general classroom? What is the general classroom teacher's measure of, say, accomplishment? When is it satisfactory in the general classroom? What has been the rate of growth for this student in the past? That will help me identify how far in the future, what I might expect a year from now in terms of what has been successful with this student in the past. Also, what is it going to take to be successful in a general classroom? If, for example, the classroom teacher says, well, students pass when they can do X, Y, and Z at 80%, at least consecutively for 2 times.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe for my student, because I have had some past history for that student, I see that they can achieve at 80, but they lose the content more quickly. Maybe I want to increase that a little bit more in order for the student to be successful in the general classroom at a later point in time. And finally, I think we have to look at that gap between the current skill and the desired skill. If the gap is really big, I might set my sights only halfway. If it's a little bit smaller, maybe I set my sights on the specific expectation in the general classroom. All of this is, there's no one specific way of doing this. It is a conversation that needs to take place with the IEP team and in setting that measure. Some additional things to think about are the criteria or expectations for demonstrating mastery in the general classroom or on the state standards. Is this a skill that's really necessary to ensure that the student will be able to perform at a mastery level? And are the expected gains over a year's period of time? What might they be, given, again, some of those things that we talked about before in terms of the past history, in terms of this student's own past history of learning? So this is probably a good time to take another short break. And when we come back, we're going to kind of look at one illustration using Johnny to kind of put it together. So during your break, be sure that you go back to the materials from Module 2 and have available description of Johnny and his present level of performance description.